let me know the details. Lastly, if you're feeling generous and you're loving the content and want to tip your favorite waitress, here's how you do it. This is that information that is also available in the description down below. Anything is greatly appreciated. Okay, that's enough for me. Let's get started. Tonight's Ask Reddit asks, what's a fact that sounds like a conspiracy theory? The first person says, the Church of Scientology had members secretly infiltrate U.S. government agencies in order to destroy unfavorable documents and investigations into them. The next person says, years ago in the lead up to the Olympics in Mexico, the country was embarrassed by massive protests about conditions for regular people there. At one of the large protests, they put snipers from their CIA equivalent in some tall buildings near where there was due to be a protest by a large government building. That building was guarded by a line of police officers. When the protesters made it to the line of police officers, they continued to peacefully protest. The CIA equivalent officers opened fire on the police, making it appear that the protesters were shooting at the cops. The cops retaliated, mowing down countless protesters, thinking they were defending themselves. Protesters were killed and fled the scene. The government was ready, rushed in, and immediately cleaned up the scene. To this day, they have no idea how many people were killed at that scene, and no one knew about the plot to investigate the massacre of the protesters, until a year later. It worked, though. There were no more protests. The next person says, Ernest Hemingway suffered from ongoing paranoia that the FBI were surveilling him, which was thought to be a key factor in his suicide. Most chalked it up to a mental illness at the time. Decades later, his file was released, proving he was under investigation for his ties to Cuba. His phones were tapped, and he was right all along. I hated reading The Old Man and the Sea in the 7th grade. I just had to get that out. Rest in peace, though, dog. Okay, next. In the spring of 1968, President Lyndon Johnson shocked the nation when he announced that he would not seek election for a second term that November. Oh my god, it's election year. Don't remind me. Okay, sorry. Am I? He gave no explanation, and pretty much everyone assumed that it was because the situation in Vietnam and his resulting unpopularity. While Vietnam undoubtedly was a factor, it was far from the full story. Concerned that males in his family tended to die young, and having barely survived a heart attack in the 1950s, sometime in 1967, Johnson had commissioned a top secret study to hilarious. The next person says tax service companies spend millions of dollars a year lobbying to make sure the IRS does not make it easier to file your taxes. This just reminded me that I need to file my taxes. I'm an adult. Bum, 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 bum. JFK's brain was removed during autopsy and stored in an archive. Its current whereabouts are unknown. Bitch, what do you mean they're unknown? Who the fuck has this man's brain? Is no one else concerned? One day we're just gonna see his head floating in a little tank like in Futurama. There are government-built bunkers dotted around the U.S. that holds a total of 1.4 billion pounds of cheese. And the government was buying excess milk to prop up the dairy industry, turning it into cheese and shoving underground since the end of Prohibition up until the Reagan administration. The Got Milk ad campaign was a government-funded psyop to get Americans to consume more dairy. I sound like a fucking crazy person, but it's real. I hate milk, so they wouldn't have got me. In 2/3 of all the U.S. states, EMS is not, I repeat, not considered an essential service. As such, it receives next to zero government funding or support. GM, Firestone, and Standard Oil bought up, dismantled, and sold abroad urban train systems in the U.S. post-World War II. Cities replaced the trains with buses from GM on Firestone tires, fueled by gas from Standard Oil. The government protected us, though. They were found guilty of having a monopoly and fined $5,000. The next person says, probably going to be buried, but this one is actually kind of funny. Sometime after World War II, the U.S. was doing some pretty wild experiments, including trying to see if they could teach dolphins to talk. They believed this was only achievable by full immersion, so they built a house and filled it with water and had researchers live with the dolphin. The dolphin was a young male and wouldn't respond to anything unless the female researcher. I'm not gonna read that. She did inappropriate things that are illegal. Is this woman in jail? Anyway, the dolphin became obsessed with the researcher, and I think when the higher-ups found out what was going on, they shut it down and never tried again. Wow, is this funny, sir? What the fuck is wrong with you? The government paid a fuckload of money just to end up having a lady whack off a dolphin. I could have gone a million years without knowing that. The next person says Operation Northwoods. The U.S. government proposed having the CIA commit terrorist attacks in the major U.S. cities so we could blame them on Cuba and go to war. The proposals called for CIA operatives to both commit and stage acts of terrorism against American military and civilian targets, blaming them on the Cuban government and using it to justify war against Cuba. The possibilities detailed in the document included the remote control of civilian aircraft, which would be secretly repainted as U.S. Air Force plane, a fabricated shoot-down of a U.S. fighter aircraft off the coast of Cuba, the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, sinking boats of Cuban refugees on the high seas, blowing up a U.S. ship, and orchestrating terrorism in the U.S. cities. The proposals were rejected by President John F. Kennedy. Alcohol poisoning during the Prohibition. As you know, in 1919, the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol was prohibited, but instead of plummeting, alcohol sales soared. Speakeasies opened everywhere, and as a result, people in some neighborhoods were drinking even more beverages got in on the act, stealing large quantities of industrial alcohol. In 1926, the authorities resorted to the hard way, asking manufacturers to add toxic substances to their alcohol, adding 10 times more methanol, for example. In New York City alone, 1,200 drinkers were poisoned and 400 died. A wave of deaths would eventually sweep across the country. This poisoning policy was not stopped until December 1933. My grandma was like 5 months old. The UK government secretly tested biological weapons on its own coastal towns to see how far they could make it inland. In the 60s and 70s, thousands of Native American women were sterilized without their consent as part of a practice to sterilize poor and minority women to help their financial situation and their families' quality of life by preventing unwanted pregnancies in poor communities. Shit makes me sick. Some were not informed at all and had it done to them without their knowledge. Others were threatened with having their health care taken away from them if they did not agree to have it done to them. Some studies estimate that as many as 25 to 50% of Native American women were sterilized in the 1970s, representing tens of thousands of victims. This is essentially a modern-day genocide in the United States. Jeffrey Epstein, was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in New York City on August 10th, 2019. On August 9th, 2019, Epstein's cellmate was transferred out, but no one took his place. The 2 guards who were assigned to check his jail unit that night fell asleep and did not check on him for about 3 hours. 2 cameras in front of Epstein's cell also malfunctioned that night. The Pentagon has an insane number of bathrooms because as they were building it, the segregation of bathrooms ended. The Pentagon was the only building in Virginia where segregation laws were not enforced. In fact, even though the bathrooms were built to comply with Virginia's segregation laws, they were never marked as colored or white. FDR had banned segregation in the federal government a year before the Pentagon was finished. In fact, just before the dedication of the Pentagon, FDR ordered that all segregated areas be integrated. All segregation in Virginia ended in 1965. Government surveillance whistleblower Edward Snowden revealed in 2013 that the U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, was conducting mass surveillance on citizens, collecting data from internet communications, phone calls, and other sources. It's really incredible how prior to Snowden you'd be treated as a tinfoil-wearing crazy person for believing there was widespread, massive government surveillance, and then the revelation came out, and basically nothing happened. GM, IBM, and Ford played a major role in rearming Germany in the 1930s. George Bush's grandfather, Senator Prescott Bush, was a director and shareholder of companies that profited from their involvement with the financial backers of the German forces. The time it takes the moon to orbit the Earth is approximately the same as it takes to rotate around its axis, which results in always the same side of the moon being visible to Earth. We never see the dark side of the moon. 100% fact, but I'm guessing the flat earthers are loving it. The CIA made a weapon known as the heart attack gun for assassination purposes. It was a pistol that quietly launched a small dart containing a shellfish toxin that causes heart attacks. There's a famous photo of Senator Frank Church showing off the gun during a congressional investigation into the CIA. The next person says, a poor black woman's, Henrietta Lacks, cells were harvested from her dead body without her consent in 1950. a scientific marvel and have been used ever since to further medical science. Her family and descendants were never asked for consent to do this, weren't informed of the breakthroughs, have continued to live in cripplingly poverty since, despite how often the HeLa cells are used and the mass amount of money Johns Hopkins makes, and still to this day are fighting to admit their mistakes and make them financially whole for their desecration of Henrietta Lacks' body. Somebody commented they were taken from her live body. The cells weren't dead. Another person commented saying to further expand, they were collected as a part of her cancer treatment with her consent. The consent issue is that Johns Hopkins ended up also using the cells for research purposes, which is a use that she did not, repeat, did not consent to. Colin Powell went before the United Nations and cited false and misleading information in order to justify invading Iraq. Somebody commented saying, I remember watching that speech and my wife said, that man does not believe a single word that he is saying. I think I'm going to end it on this note because I need to go cook dinner. I am starving. But at the age of 60, Snoop Dogg will be 420 in dog years. Okay, guys. That's all, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below. I can only imagine if this is your first video that you're watching with me, you're probably like, what is your first impression of me? I'm so curious. If you have your own spooky, scary, unsettling Reddit-like story that you would like for me to read in a future video, make sure to email this email right here, which is also available in the description down below. It does not have to be your own story. It could be your mama's, your daddy's, your grandpappy's, anybody's, your friends, or something you completely made up. You just gotta let me know the details down below. Holy shit, I'm out of breath. I feel like this video suddenly turned into like a Dare commercial. Don't do drugs, kids. You'll breathe like her. And to the people who have submitted stories, I see you. I know I haven't responded. I tend to not respond until I've made the video and then I send you a link and I'm like, yay, here's a present. It's very dumb of me. I don't know why I do that, but I see you and I love you. Okay. Lastly, if you're loving the content, tip your favorite waitress. Here. This information is also available in the description down below. Again, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Namaste. Have a nice day.